Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Ukrainians are fighting smarter by using drones that can destroy tanks, and their strategy is paying off. Russian forces pulled back in the face of a fierce counterattack.
Ukraine's success is due in part to military aid sent by the West and technology given by private donors. Chuck Holton brings us the story from the front lines.
Ukrainians hope their military's counteroffensive in the east could signal a turning point in the war. The ongoing operation has been so successful, the Ukrainian army has retaken more ground in 5 days than the Russians captured in the past 5 months.
This operation was possible because of the resolve of the armed forces, because our commanders, from the president to every commander in the battlefield, are so devoted to the victory.
The city of Kharkiv has endured almost daily rocket attacks since April. On Sunday, a Russian missile strike took out the power grid, causing the city to go dark. It once held 1 million people, but is now relatively empty, and those who stayed live in constant fear of death from a Russian missile. Now, nearby villages feel hopeful as Ukrainian troops push the invaders out. Up until now, Russia has held a huge advantage in tanks and artillery, but the Ukrainians have figured out how to turn off-the-shelf technology into a force multiplier, making a commercial drone nearly equal to a Russian tank in combat power.
One of our soldiers with the technology, it's stronger than maybe 10 or 20 soldiers from Russia.
If you are unfamiliar with warfare, you might say that there was heavy fighting going on in this area where we are, in a place called Pisky in the southern part of Donetsk province. And though there have been artillery barrages going near constantly for the several hours that we've been here now, it doesn't necessarily qualify as a pitched battle. That's because the Russians are just randomly firing artillery pretty much all day long, all night long. They have a near limitless supply of that, but they're not really making any gains. And that's because the Ukrainians are fighting smarter. And in so doing, they can hold off the Russians, even though the Russians outnumber them about 50 to 1.
The technology now is good. When you have a mobile phone and you can fighting with the technology, this helps us to win.
A Russian tank costs about $4.5 million to build, while an off-the-shelf drone runs a little over $1,000. Since these tiny drones are responsible for destroying hundreds of tanks, that makes them priceless for these Ukrainian airborne troopers.
Rather than fight the Russian tanks head-to-head, we use the drones to spot the enemy positions, then pass that information on to our long-range artillery to be destroyed. The only thing we need is more ammo. If we had enough ammunition, the enemy wouldn't stand a chance.
Many of these drones and internet systems have been donated, courtesy of individuals giving to crowdfunding projects. For these troops who've been fighting without a break since the war began, it brings hope. They may soon get back to their loved ones.
I tell my girls, I love you so much, that's why I stay here. My oldest daughter said, "Papa, did you get shot?" And I said, "No, the Russians don't have the budget for that this year."
I'm absolutely sure that we will win, but it's maybe not in this month, or maybe not to the end of this year, but it's as soon as possible. I'm absolutely sure that this is possible.
From the Donbass, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Well, there's a behind-the-scenes look at why the Ukrainian army seems to be, against all odds, winning this war, pushing Russia back. I hope Russia gets the message and they stop this and they start recognizing the Ukrainian borders and say, all of this was a tremendous mistake. We should have never tried to create some kind of greater Russia. This is a false nationalism. Let's recognize our Ukrainian brothers and stop this war. Let us all pray that that happens very quickly. In other news, a cutback in the flow of oil from Russia to Europe could make an impact right here at home. Ephraim Graham has that story and more from the CBN Newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, the United States could see a rise in gas and energy prices this winter. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said higher prices are a risk as the European Union pursues its plan to halt Russian oil imports.
This winter, the European Union will cease, for the most part, buying Russian oil. It is possible that that could cause a spike in oil prices.
Gas prices reached all-time highs earlier this year. While they've dropped in recent months, the average price for a gallon of gas is still more than $3.70. That, along with high inflation, has put the Biden administration on the defensive for its economic policies. Tomorrow, the Labor Department releases Consumer Price Index for August. It will tell us if inflation is increasing or slowing down. Turning now to the United Kingdom, where Queen Elizabeth's casket is making its journey through her beloved Scotland. King Charles III and the Queen Consort meeting the procession after addressing members of Parliament earlier today. Dale Hurd has the story.
Britain's new King and Queen Consort met with members of Parliament before Charles III addressed the body this morning.
As I stand before you today, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us.
Then traveling back to Scotland to join other members of the royal family for a procession to St. Giles Cathedral, where the Queen's casket will lie in state so the people of Scotland can pay their respects. The Queen's final journey began Sunday as the glass-windowed hearse left her Balmoral estate and traveled through the Scottish countryside.
Just important to say goodbye. She's been on the throne for a long time. So, yeah, it means a lot.
Thousands lined her route to say goodbye.
She loved Ballater, she loved Royal Deeside, and we loved her as well.
Some threw flowers. There was even an honor guard of tractors.
It was the farming community doing their part to show their appreciation for what she'd done for agriculture.
Then a dozen horses paid tribute to the Queen as an equestrian. Charles is now head of state to 14 other nations, known as realms of the Commonwealth, including the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and a host of Caribbean and Pacific islands. But that may be changing. Antigua and Barbuda and Jamaica are now set to vote on whether to remove the British monarch as their head of state and become republics.
We are moving on as an independent, developed, prosperous country.
Barbados became independent earlier this year. The Queen's funeral will be held in Westminster Abbey on Monday, September 19th. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden have accepted an invitation to attend. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Dale, thank you. Back here at home, Americans across the nation paused Sunday to remember the victims of the 9/11 attacks 21 years ago. Communities held tributes pledging to never forget those who lost their lives in the attacks, as well as those first responders who succumbed years later from illness contracted at the site. Relatives of the victims gathered at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the Pennsylvania field, where Flight 93 crashed after the passengers rushed the cockpit. First Lady Jill Biden addressed the crowd there.
9/11 touched us all. It changed us all, but it reminds us we can be a light in that darkness.
The president spoke at the Pentagon and the vice president at the World Trade Center site. Yesterday also marked 10 years since the attack on two U.S. facilities in Benghazi, Libya, by a radical Islamic group. U.S. Ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, and 3 other Americans died in those attacks. Gordon.
Well, let's never forget what happened on 9/11, and these anniversaries keep rolling by, and it just is a reminder we haven't really won the war against the ideology. You can't particularly have a war against terrorism outside of a war of ideology, to say your radical ideas that somehow or other you're serving God and making a pathway to heaven by going and blowing people up and taking innocent lives. Until we say that that is a false ideology and until we stand up to that, we're going to continue to see this. It's happening literally every week in the Muslim world. And this ideology, it absolutely has to change.